Kezia had been selling groundnuts by the roadside since she was 16 years old, and not once in all those years had she ever considered herself unlucky. That morning started the same way every morning started. She was up before the sun. She swept the front of the small house she shared with Mama Adisa, boiled water for tea, and packed her wooden tray with the small paper cones of roasted groundnuts that she and her mother had stayed up late preparing the night before. By the time the first light came through the trees, Kezia was already on her way to her usual spot near the junction on Barrow Street, where the taxis slowed down and people waited, and the morning crowd was always thick. She was 24 years old. She had 1 year left at the community college, where she was studying business administration. She paid her own fees. She bought her own books. Everything she had earned standing on that roadside with a tray on her head, and a smile that never once asked for pity. But what if that one ordinary morning was about to become the morning that changed everything? What would happen when Kezia looked up from her tray and saw what no one else around her wanted to see? Stay with us. Watch until the end, because this story is about to show you just how far a single act of kindness can reach. The junction on Barrow Street was busy by 7 in the morning. Taxis honked. Motorbikes threaded through the gaps. Women with trays walked up and down the road calling out their wares. Children in school uniforms crossed carefully between the cars. Kezia knew almost every face that passed. She had been standing in the same spot long enough to recognize the regulars. The woman who always bought 2 cones before catching the early taxi. The old man who stopped to rest his legs against the wall near her tray. The schoolboys who pooled their coins to buy 1 cone and then argued over who got the bigger share. That morning she was counting change when she noticed something that made her stop. Near the concrete wall on the far side of the junction stood an elderly woman. She was small and bent slightly forward. Her dress was faded, the kind of faded that comes not from one wash, but from years of washing. She held a plastic bag in one hand. Her other hand was pressed against the wall, as if the wall was the only thing keeping her upright. Kezia watched her for a moment. People moved around the woman without looking at her. Taxis passed. The crowd kept moving. The woman's head dropped forward slightly, then lifted again. Something was wrong. Kezia set her tray down carefully and crossed the road. When she got close, she could see the woman's eyes were half closed. Her breathing was shallow. Her lips were dry. There was a fine trembling in her hands that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Ma, are you all right?" The woman did not answer right away. Her eyes opened slowly and found Kezia's face. "I just need a moment," the woman said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Kezia looked around. 3 people were standing within arm's reach of them. None of them had stopped. A taxi driver had seen the woman leaning against the wall and driven past without slowing down. Kezia put her hand on the woman's arm. "You need to sit down. Let me help you." The woman's knees buckled slightly before she could answer. Kezia caught her. She was lighter than she looked. Kezia guided her slowly to the low wall at the edge of the road and helped her sit. "Can you tell me your name?" Kezia asked. The woman blinked. "Irene," she said. "My name is Irene." Kezia crouched down in front of her. "Miss Irene, when did you last eat something?" A long pause. "Yesterday," Irene said finally. Kezia stood up. She went back across the road to her tray, took out her own small cloth bag where she kept her breakfast, a boiled egg and a piece of bread she had packed before leaving home, and brought it back. "Here, eat this first." Irene looked at the food. Then she looked at Kezia. "I cannot take your food." "You can," Kezia said. "It is mine to give." She waited while Irene ate slowly. After a few minutes, some color came back into the old woman's face. But she still did not look well. Her skin was warm to the touch. Her eyes were glassy. Kezia made a decision. She went back to her tray. She packed everything up. She flagged down a passing taxi and negotiated the fare. Then she came back to Irene. "I am taking you to the clinic." Irene shook her head. "I will be fine. I just needed to rest." "Miss Irene," Kezia said gently but firmly, "you have a fever. I can feel it. The clinic is 10 minutes from here. Please." There was a long moment where neither of them spoke. Then Irene nodded slowly. They rode to the clinic together. Kezia sat beside her in the back seat and kept one hand on Irene's arm in case she lost her balance again. At the clinic, the nurses took one look at the old woman and moved quickly. Kezia sat in the waiting area and counted the money in her bag. It was not enough. She had her groundnut money for the morning, and a small amount she had been saving for a textbook she needed. She looked at the two amounts together and pressed her lips together. When the doctor came out to give her the bill, she paid it without saying anything about the textbook. An hour passed. Then the doctor came back out and told her that Irene had severe dehydration and early signs of heat exhaustion. They had put her on a drip and she was resting. She would be discharged later that afternoon. Kezia stayed. She was still there when Irene was brought out in a wheelchair at 4 in the afternoon, looking steadier but tired and somehow smaller than she had seemed in the morning. When Irene saw Kezia still sitting in the waiting room, her expression shifted into something complicated. "You are still here," Irene said. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," Kezia said. Irene studied her face for a long moment. "You lost your whole morning's work because of me." Kezia shook her head. "I can sell tomorrow." There was a quiet between them. Then Irene asked, "Is there someone you need to call? Someone who can come pick you up?" Irene looked out toward the clinic entrance. She did not answer right away. When she did, her voice was careful, controlled. "No," she said. "There is no one." Kezia did not press. She simply asked the next question. "Where do you live, Miss Irene?" Another pause. Irene's hands folded in her lap. "I have been staying in a room near the market." She hesitated. "The man who rented it to me asked me to leave last week. I have been managing." Kezia understood what that meant. She had heard enough versions of that sentence in her own life to understand exactly what it covered. She thought of the house she shared with Mama Adisa. It was small. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a bathroom with a door that did not close all the way. There was barely room for the 2 of them. She thought about it for another moment. Then she said, "Come with me tonight." Irene looked at her. "To your home?" "Yes, you can rest properly, just until you feel better." Irene's eyes filled. She blinked it back quickly, the way older women do when they have had years of practice at not crying in front of strangers. "You do not know me," Irene said. Kezia picked up her bag and her tray. "No, but I know you need somewhere to sleep tonight, and I have a couch." They took a taxi back together. Kezia had been thinking about what to say to Mama Disa the whole ride home. Mama Disa was not a woman who accepted surprises easily. She was careful and practical, and she had spent 24 years teaching Kezia to be the same way. She worried about people who showed up without explanation. She had reasons for that. When they walked through the door, Mama Adisa was in the kitchen. She heard them come in and came to the doorway. She looked at Irene. Then she looked at Kezia. Kezia began explaining before her mother could ask. She told her everything. She told her about seeing Irene by the wall at the junction. She told her about the clinic, the bill, the dehydration. She told her about the room near the market. Mama Adisa listened without interrupting. When Kezia finished, there was a silence. Then Mama Adisa said, "How long?" "Just until she is strong enough to find somewhere," Kezia said. Another silence. Mama Adisa looked at Irene again. Not an unkind look, a measuring look, the look of a woman who had been careful her whole life and knew exactly how much careful it cost her. "You will sleep on the couch," Mama Adisa said finally, "and you will eat with us." Irene pressed her hand to her chest. "Thank you," she said. Her voice came out uneven. "Thank you." Mama Adisa nodded once and went back to the kitchen. Irene stayed for 2 weeks. She was quiet at first. She ate what was put in front of her, helped where she could, washed her own dishes, folded her blanket each morning, and left the couch exactly as she had found it. She did not make demands. She did not ask questions. But she watched everything. She watched Kezia leave before dawn with her tray. She watched Mama Adisa iron her work clothes at 5:30 in the morning before taking the early bus to the cleaning job she had held for 11 years. She watched them come home tired and still find things to laugh about over dinner. She watched the way Kezia stayed up past midnight sometimes, reading her textbooks at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea beside her. One evening, Kezia came home and found Irene sitting on the front step with a bowl of green beans in her lap, working through them slowly in the last of the daylight. Kezia sat down beside her. "You have 1 more year of school," Irene said. It was not a question. "Yes," Kezia said. "Business." "Yes, ma'am. What do you want to do after?" Kezia pulled one knee up to her chest. "I want to start something of my own." I have been thinking about a small catering supply business, buying in bulk and selling to the food vendors in the market. I know what they need because I am one of them." Irene was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You have thought this through for a long time," Kezia said. They sat together until the light faded. Then they went inside. 3 days later, Kezia came home and Irene was gone. Not gone in a way that left signs of trouble. The couch was folded as neatly as always. The cup she used for tea was washed and sitting on the drying rack. But the small bag she carried was not in the corner by the couch where she always kept it. Her one pair of shoes was not by the door. Kezia checked outside. She walked to the end of the road and looked both ways. She asked the woman who sold plantains 2 houses down if she had seen an elderly woman leave that afternoon. The woman said she thought she saw someone get into a car. A big car, she said. Black. Kezia stood there for a moment. She went home and told Mama Adisa. Mama Adisa's face went through several things at once. "Maybe she found somewhere better," Mama Adisa said finally. "But she did not say goodbye," Kezia said. Neither of them had an answer for that. Weeks passed. Life returned to its shape. The groundnut tray. The early mornings, the textbooks, the late nights at the kitchen table. Kezia found herself looking for Irene's face, sometimes at the junction, or in the market or near the clinic. She never saw her. Then one morning, 5 weeks after Irene had disappeared, a car turned onto their road. It was not a car that belonged on their road. Everyone who lived there knew the difference. This was a black SUV, clean and large, moving slowly as if looking for a specific address. It stopped in front of their house. Kezia was standing in the front yard. She had been sorting through a crate of groundnuts when she heard the engine. She stood up and watched. The driver stepped out first. He was in a neat, dark jacket. He walked around to the rear door and opened it. The woman who stepped out was wearing a cream-colored suit. Her silver hair was pinned up carefully. She wore simple jewelry, the kind of simple that costs more than it looks. She moved with the ease of someone who had not worried about money in a very long time. Kezia stared. She knew the eyes. She knew the way the woman's head tilted slightly to the left before she spoke. "Miss Irene," Kezia said. The woman smiled, the same smile, the same warmth but wearing different clothes, standing differently, being different in every way except the eyes. "Hello, Kezia." Kezia could not speak for a moment. Mama Adisa appeared in the doorway. She saw the car first, then she saw the woman. She stepped out slowly onto the front step. Irene looked at them both. "I owe you both an explanation. May I come in?" They sat together in the small living room, the 4 walls that Kezia had grown up inside of. The furniture that had been there so long it had shaped itself to the family. Irene sat in the chair across from the couch and looked around the room with an expression that was hard to name. Not pity, something closer to recognition. She folded her hands and began. "My name is Irene Okafor-Wells. I run a foundation. We have been operating for 18 years. We fund scholarships, small business grants, and emergency support for women and families who are working to build something. Every 2 years, I do what I did this year." She paused. "I spend time in the streets. I dress differently. I remove everything that marks me as who I am. And I go to places where people are struggling, because I want to see for myself how people treat those they believe cannot help them back." The room was very quiet. "I have done this 7 times now," Irene continued. "I have been ignored. I have been spoken to as if I was invisible. Once a man took the plastic bag I was carrying and told me to move away from the front of his shop. She looked at Kezia, and then I met you." Kezia said nothing. Her throat had tightened in a way that made it hard. "You crossed a road full of traffic to check on a stranger," Irene said. "You gave me your breakfast. You paid a bill that was not your responsibility, and stayed at a clinic for hours on a day when you had work to do. And when I had no place to sleep, you brought me into your home." She looked at Mama Adisa. "And you let a stranger onto your couch without knowing anything about her, because your daughter asked you to." Mama Adisa pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright. "The fever was real," Irene said. "I want you to know that. I spent too long in the heat that day and my body gave out. That part was not planned. But even when it stopped being a test, you were still there." Silence settled over the room. Then Irene reached into the bag her driver had placed on the floor beside her. She set a folder on the coffee table. I would like to offer Kezia a full scholarship to complete her degree with a stipend for living expenses so she can stop dividing her time between the tray and the textbooks. Kezia looked at the folder. She did not touch it yet. Irene continued, and I would like to offer her, when she graduates, a seed grant for the business she told me about, the catering supply idea. She has thought it through. With the right support, it will work. Kezia finally looked up. Irene was not finished, and I would like to offer Mama Adisa one thing, which she can refuse if she wants. I have a property I have not been using, a house. It needs some repairs, but the bones are good. I would like to transfer it to her name. The sound Mama Adisa made was very small, just a breath that came out wrong. Kezia looked at her mother. Mama Adisa had her hand over her mouth. Her shoulders were shaking very slightly. Years of the 5:30 bus and the cleaning job and the ironing before dawn. Years of buying the cheaper cut of meat and making it taste like the expensive one, because she had learned how. Years of sitting at the kitchen table after Kezia went to sleep and looking at numbers that never quite added up, and then waking up the next morning anyway and starting over. Kezia reached across and took her mother's hand. Mama Adisa pressed her daughter's hand hard. She was crying now. She did not try to stop it. Irene watched them. Her own face was not entirely steady. You do not have to say yes today, Irene said. I want you to think about it. Take the folder. Look at everything. Ask me whatever you want to ask me. Mama Adisa shook her head. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. We do not need time, Mama Adisa said. Her voice was rough. We say yes. Irene smiled. What followed in the next several months was the kind of change that comes so fast it feels unreal, even while it is happening. Kezia enrolled as a full-time student for the first time since she had started at the community college. No more dividing mornings between the tray and the library. No more sitting in class calculating whether she could afford the bus fare home. She moved through her final year differently, with a stillness that came from not being afraid of what happened at the end of the month. The business plan that had lived in a notebook under her bed for 2 years came out into the light. She spent evenings on it. She revised it. She showed it to 2 of her professors, who marked it up and gave it back, covered in suggestions. She revised it again. She sent it to Irene, who sent it back with one note. This is good. Build it. Mama Adisa moved into the house in the spring. The repairs took 8 weeks. On the day the keys were handed over, she walked through every room by herself first, the way she had done in the old house on the night Kezia was born, walking from room to room as if making sure it was real. The kitchen had a window over the sink. Mama Adisa stood at that window for a long time. When Kezia found her there, she asked, Mama, what are you doing? Mama Adisa turned around. There was something on her face that Kezia had not seen many times before, a full kind of peace. I am just looking at the yard, Mama Adisa said. You have been looking at it for 20 minutes. I know. She smiled. I wanted to. Graduation day came on a Thursday in June. The hall was full and warm. Kezia sat in the 3rd row with her robe, slightly wrinkled from being packed too long in the bag. When her name was called, she walked across the stage and shook the dean's hand and accepted her diploma. And in the front row she could see Mama Adisa on her feet. Before the applause had even started, one hand pressed to her chest, laughing and crying at the same time, the way people do when joy gets too big to only be one thing. Irene was there too, seated beside Mama Adisa, dressed quietly, easy to miss if you did not know to look for her. She clapped without standing, but her smile was the kind that takes up the whole face. After the ceremony, there was a small gathering at the new house. Mama Adisa had cooked for 2 days. The kitchen window steamed up. People came and went, and the noise was the kind of noise that a house holds on to long after everyone has left. At one point during the evening, Kezia found herself standing in the backyard by herself. She was holding a cup of juice she had not drunk. The sky was going purple at the edges. She thought about the morning at the junction on Barrow Street, the woman leaning against the wall, all those people walking past. She had not known anything that morning. She had not known the woman's name or her history or what she was really doing there. She had just known that someone needed help, and she was close enough to give it. She thought about her mother in the kitchen, about the textbook she had bought with the money she had pulled out of savings, the one she had bought instead of a new dress, about the years of the tray, about the nights at the kitchen table. She thought about all the times someone could have stopped and helped and did not. She was glad she had stopped. Irene appeared beside her after a while. She had a cup of tea in her hands. They stood together without saying anything for a moment. Then Irene said, "How does it feel?" Kezia thought about it honestly. "Like it belongs to someone else," she said, "and also exactly like mine." Irene nodded. "That feeling goes away," she said, "but it takes a little time." They stood in the yard until Mama Adisa called from the kitchen doorway, telling them the food was getting cold and neither of them was exempt. 6 months after graduation, Kezia registered her business. She called it Cornerstone Supply. She started with 3 clients, food vendors she already knew from years of standing at the same junction. Within the first quarter, she had 7. By the end of the year, she had 19. She hired her first employee in the spring, a young woman named Tola who had 2 children and a second-hand bicycle and more practical sense than most people Kezia had met. Kezia paid her a fair wage from the start. She did not explain why that mattered to her. Tola did not ask. Some things are understood without being said. One afternoon, a year and a half after everything had changed, Kezia was at her desk going through orders when her phone rang. It was Irene. "I have a young woman I would like you to meet," Irene said. "She is starting something small and she needs someone to talk to who has been where she is." Kezia put down her pen. "Send me her number," she said. After the call ended, she sat for a moment. She thought about Irene, sitting against the wall at the junction, leaning on the concrete as if it was the only thing holding her up. She thought about the moment she had crossed the road. How small that moment had seemed. How ordinary. She thought about Tola, bicycling across the city before her children were awake to be somewhere she was needed. She thought about her mother at the kitchen window, looking at the yard. She thought about how many times a day people pass someone who needs them and keep walking, and how the whole world stays smaller because of it. Then she opened her phone and wrote down the number Irene had sent, and she was already looking forward to making the call.